What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Come Play is no perfect movie. And Come Play is about a nonverbal autistic kid named Oliver, played by Azhy. What kind of first name is that? It's the little kid from Marriage Story who, yeah, does kind of look like Danny Torrance from The Shining once in a while, and that part was actually kind of funny. Who is receiving messages through his phone, tablet, numerous electronic devices by this long limbed creature named Larry, who wants to be his friend and pull him through the devices into its own world. So his parents, played by Gillian Jacobs and John Gallagher Jr., do everything they can to protect their son while also trying to understand him better as a person. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of mine, you might remember that I did an analysis video on autistic characters in movies and TV shows because I do have Asperger's syndrome, and part of the reason I wanted to make that video was to half rant about how shitty season 1 of Atypical was, and the other half to focus on the fact that there are legitimately realistic portrayals of autism in media. And I am happy to say that Oliver, the main character, is probably the most likable aspect of this movie because outside of his inability to physically speak, and that mostly just does come down to him being afraid of how others perceive him, which is why it's so difficult for him to actually express himself through words. Other than that, I love that he's actually portrayed as an everyday average kid. He has the exact same common interests and hobbies as most kids his age would. He felt very realistic in that he can actually pick up on certain subtle clues. He'll listen to his parents arguing one night, and then the next morning he sees all of these boxes and suitcases that are packed up, and he can honestly already sense some tension between his parents and that he knows one of them is going out the door anytime soon. I really like that the director and writer, whose name I'm blanking on in a second, I'll remember it later, but I love that he portrays some realistic traits while still adding this element of respect that really works. Hell, there's actually a bullying sequence where, as opposed to just saying, you guys just don't understand how I operate or even try to explain himself, he actually just lashes back and insults to fire back. He'll dial down in his phone, yeah, well, you're ugly, you're stupid, which is actually a lot more honest and natural, and I just love that about the characterization. He actually felt like an everyday kid who just so happens to only feel comfortable communicating sentences through his phone, and that little lack of knowledge or understanding from his classmates and his parents is really the only thing that's really bogging down his life. And that element also does, in a way, kind of add tension to the scares because he becomes very conflicted over whether or not his parents are really all that well-meaning as individuals. Meanwhile, this long-limbed creature, Larry, is clearly manipulating him by showing that he understands more about him than his actual parents do. Larry knows what his favorite TV show is. He knows what his hobbies are. He knows that he likes to draw, and he's very welcoming while also only attacking people that Larry deems dangerous to this kid Oliver. So even though we as an audience know that he's manipulating this kid and that he is clearly up to no good, it does make sense why Oliver would be a little more comfortable with Larry being around and possibly even siding with him. But that also, at the same time, does kind of make the arc centering around the characters a little more weak in comparison. But in all fairness, Gillian Jacobs does a really good job at portraying a character who's so conflicted in that she wants her son to have as normal of a life as possible and just to have friends that he can share a life with. But at the same time, she's also pushing him in situations where not only he can get hurt, but others can, including herself, her husband, other children whose parents are friends of hers. And with John Gallagher, it's tougher on him well, okay, not tougher, but it's tough in general because he doesn't spend that much time with his son in general because he's spending so much time working to try to provide. And the two parents are constantly at odds with each other. And that part is really nice. But the issue that I really had with it is that throughout the entire movie, they want us to side with the mom because she dedicates the most amount of time in her life. She takes this kid to speech therapy classes. She tries to organize slumber parties, get-togethers, anything where he can experience social interaction, and that part's good. But because she does spend so much time with her son, she actually makes a lot more mistakes. Some of them serve absolutely no purpose other than to propel the plot and the scares. And the reason I side a little bit more with the dad, even though he technically isn't really all that good of a parent, he does spend more time at work than with his own son. But when he does spend time with Oliver, he doesn't try to micromanage and predict every possible worst case scenario. He just treats his son like a friend and deals with the stress as it comes, which is what a parent should. And not only that, the mom gives the dad crap for constantly working and never spending time with him. At least the dad actually works, has a job, is providing and paying for the phone that he has to use to communicate on a regular day basis. What exactly is it that you do? We never see her work. We never hear her talk about her job. It's never mentioned or even implied that she's a stay-at-home mom, and that wouldn't have made a difference anyways, because she complains about how she has to stay up late at night whenever her son has nightmares, and yet when she's home by herself with these kids at a slumber party and shit is really going down and they're making noise, she somehow still sleeps through it and then wakes up, of course, when it's too late, and everyone, of course, blames her son, and it's just unbelievably ridiculous. And of course, she does legitimately believe that her son might be bad or evil in a couple scenarios until the ghost, through reasons I don't want to spoil, because the creature's plot to tear this family apart and take the son is actually legitimately clever. It's not until the ghost actually attacks her and she goes around saying, "I know this sounds crazy, but there's a ghost coming at us. Why don't you believe me?" Gee, I don't know, maybe because ghosts don't actually exist, and that's kind of the major problem for me personally. The direction is decent enough, and the actors do the best with what they're given, but the script is just so unbelievably cliched. And as I mentioned before, it's written and directed by the exact same person, Jacob Chase. He originally made a 5-minute short film, kind of like how Lights Out was a short film and then a feature. I have seen the Larry short film, and I didn't think it was all that good, but I will say this, Chase does have a competent enough directing technique when it comes to building up scares. He uses some longer takes where the camera pans from one location to another, and then once you notice very minor details like objects moving from one place to another or light bulbs going off and on when in an instant, you're constantly glued to the screen anticipating what else is going to happen. And for a while, you don't even see Larry. You mostly see these POV shots through laptops, iPads, or even curtains and blinds that give him this unseen, unknowable, and therefore unstoppable force. And that part is pretty intense, especially considering most of the time the characters don't actually see him. You actually see an empty area, but you hear all these footsteps and loud shrieks and growls that really build up the tension nicely, and then it'll just punctuate with a generic jump scare. There's only one fake out for the entire movie. That part was nice. Most of the scares were actually legitimate, but I mean, you know exactly when they're going to happen, you know what they're going to be, and you know for a fact, as I mentioned before, nobody's going to believe them because you're walking around saying, "I know this sounds crazy, but there's a ghost after me." Seriously, why do people in movies actually say that? Why would you go ask someone for help and ask for help by saying something that will get you no help whatsoever? Can anyone seriously explain to me how that is supposed to be logical? I know it's a movie, it's not supposed to reflect reality, but it should feel real, and hearing this explanation and seeing people go, "Yeah, whatever," it's ridiculous. It's old. It's really fucking old. So is the whole not believing the kid because they're different, which they don't do that very often, thankfully, and I mean, any other horror movie, and a quote-unquote normal person gets accused of being crazy all the time anyway, so I'm not going to say that this movie is ableist or anything like that, but at the same time, like, I'm just realizing this now. Half this movie wouldn't have even happened if the kid switched from communicating on a phone to communicating with a pencil and paper, because he does that half the time anyways when he doesn't have his phone, because for various circumstances, he loses that phone. And some people are going to say, well, a phone's just quicker to communicate, and not everyone carries around a piece of paper and pencil in order to talk with one another. I got 2 words for you. Sign language. The parents could have learned that. It would have made things a lot easier. It would have made the conversations more tense because you have to look on the screen, look at the sign language. The kid's constantly stimming with his fingers, so teaching him sign language would have been a hell of a lot more useful anyways. There's just so much about this movie that, in terms of logic, just doesn't work. It's not by any means an awful horror movie. It's not a disrespectful movie by any means. And for the most part, it is well made. The direction itself is perfectly fine, and the actors are serviceable. It's just, it doesn't really amount to all that much. So, for all those reasons, I'm going to give Come Play a 2 out of 5. Anyways, guys, thank you as always for watching. If by any chance you have seen Come Play, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more movie reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.